Hello, dear audience. We are going to speak about resurrection. We are in a season of resurrection that happened almost 2,000 years ago in ancient Israel. From that point on, everything has been changed, and the human life has changed itself, and the approach to the life, to the universe, has changed in our hearts and in our minds. We are going to speak about the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And Presbyter Yaki will explain what does resurrection mean. Why do we have to concentrate on resurrection so much? Why Paul and other apostles emphasize resurrection so much? Welcome, Presbytera. Thank you for giving us this chance to talk about the glorious resurrection that our Lord had 2,000 years ago. And until now, 2,000 years later, the whole entire world, I would say almost, is celebrating this wonderful and miraculous act. A few months ago, right before the Feast of Resurrection, I was speaking with this teenager, and the conversation developed, and I realized that she doesn't know what Easter is. To her, Easter was bunnies and eggs. And the sad part was that she went through 10 years of Sunday school. I had only 10 minutes. I explained what Easter stands for. Why do we celebrate Easter? What do we celebrate behind it? What is the real meaning of this feast? But I know that many people outside of the church walls don't know what's going on. They even celebrate. All the stores carry all these bunnies and grass and all kinds of decorations, but people blindly follow the commercialism and don't really know what's going on. Or maybe there is something else that is going on we don't know as Christians, and we should probably address that also. So please introduce us the resurrection with your human words. I know that resurrection is impossible to describe as a human being, but what we understand, what we get from the New Testament, what we get from the Fathers. What is your understanding of resurrection?
Arkady, Christ is risen.
Truly He is.
We just exchanged an ancient Christian greeting that goes back many centuries. That's an affirmation from one Christian to the next that we truly believe in the resurrection of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, whom we believe to be God and human, one person. This is not a small thing. To say Christ is risen is to say that God died while He was still God. To say Christ is risen is to say somehow the recapitulation not only of all of humanity, but all of creation died and was brought back. Mm-hmm. And so when we say Christ is risen, we are affirming that all of creation, that we as Christians believe is an act of the loving God, due to many things we've talked about in the past, that there was a fall, Adam and Eve sinned, and somehow all of creation was tainted or affected by that fall. That because of the love of God, all of creation was not only healed of that fall, but was in a sense recreated. Something new has occurred that not only repaired the past, but has changed the course of history forever. With Christ dying and resurrecting, all of humanity, in fact all of creation, has been changed. Now, we talked about this earlier in previous episodes, that by Christ becoming incarnate, by the second person of the Trinity, we believe that God is Trinity, a Trinity of three persons. What does that mean? It doesn't sound logical. Are you worshiping three gods? No, we would say 1 and 1 and 1 equals 1. That doesn't make sense in our mathematics, but we would affirm that from our experience through history, that the second person of this one God joined Himself to all of creation, especially humanity. He became human for our sake. And because of that, all of reality has been affected. Every molecule Every cell in every person's body has been affected by that phenomenon since that time. So with Christ's death and resurrection, somehow all of the cosmos has been changed. What we affirm is that death has been vanquished. Sin has been overcome. Does that mean we don't sin? No, we human beings, we still sin. Does that mean people and things don't die? No, we still die. People die, animals die, plants die. And at the same time, we still affirm that something much bigger, beyond our capacity to understand with our regular logic, has occurred that sets us right in a new way with our relationship with God. And that potentially all of us have the capacity, by surrendering and trusting our whole lives to this God of love, of becoming one with Him and one another.
Presbyter, you mentioned about God becoming human and dying, and through that death recovering us from our death that we had experienced as Adam and Eve. When we speak about the death of Adam and Eve, usually we say that they died spiritually or they started dying, according to the Hebrew text, which is a verb that's it's continuous action. Why did Christ had to die physically? We died with Him and we rose, but we never physically did. But He had to die physically. He had to die on the cross, suffer, and then rise.
You're bringing up some nuanced theological issues here that I want to pay attention to. We can't talk about all of them, but just a little bit. You said that when Adam and Eve fell, they started dying. That's right. And in the ancient Judeo-Christian understanding of that, Adam and Eve and the earliest generations of humans post the fall, after the fall of Adam and Eve, their lifespans, as we understand it, were far longer than we understand the lifespan right now. They would live hundreds of years by our understanding as we read the scriptures. Why? Because they started dying. And so the human person was created for ongoing relationship with God, physically and spiritually. It's somehow, by that rejection of life, capital L, the love of God, the fall of Adam and Eve was their desire to become God without God. Now, God wanted humanity to reign with Him, still wants that, out of this love that we don't understand, and be with Him as much as creatures can be in ways that we humans don't understand. But when Adam and Eve tried to take a shortcut and become God without God, that introduced sin and death and limitation in ways that was not present. What does that mean specifically? We don't know. But this tells us something about the capacity for God's love and God's hope in us as a humanity. When we blew it, death was introduced. And so through the centuries, humans tended to live longer. At least that's our understanding as a faith affirmation, as Christians who still hold on to that Semitic, that Judeo-Christian understanding of life.
We definitely can say that when God says you will die, He means specifically and exactly the physical death, because Christ also physically died to save us from the death.
And it's also to be cut off from the love of God. Not that God stopped loving them, but our rejecting God cuts us off from the source of life itself.
Someone wanted to help a troubled group of children and became a street person and lived with them, became their leader, and then started leading them out of where they were. If we did not die physically in the Garden of Eden as Adam and Eve, why did Christ need to die physically? So now it's kind of clear that it was a journey to the physical death.
What you're reminding me is that every dimension of reality was touched by the fall. Sin, limitation, illness, death, nothing was left untouched. Now, I don't know if this person is watching, but we received an email a couple of months ago from a scientist in the area. He said, well, my understanding is that death is a good thing, and that many things in reality, as we understand it in life now, is an action of God's love for us, that somehow God works through death. And so I want to tip my hat to that person, because there is something that has been referred to in the scriptures, from the Psalms on, to the mystery of death. That somehow God does work through death, and that some ancient Christian writers, holy people, fathers, have said that even before creation was made, God saw that Adam and Eve would fall in this way and sort of built a plan B or plan C into creation out of his love for us. And paradoxically, his absolute respect for human freedom. So even by respecting human freedom and experiencing the agony of rejection that Adam and Eve symbolically, whoever Adam and Eve were, we believe there was an Adam and Eve, but whatever that symbolic rejection was, even from before creation, God had in his mind and heart ways of responding to that rejection to bring us closer to him. And so because death and limitation and illness touched every corner of reality, by God himself taking that on, taking that creatureliness on, becoming one with us, means that all of creation, everything, has now been touched by God in a way that had not happened before Christ becoming human. And so when God died, he literally took part of us with him and has situated us in a way that had not occurred before for new life.
I heard a mystic who was talking about death as actually a good thing, and he was saying, imagine if there was no death on planet Earth. And he was comparing it to taking off your worn-out shoes. But we also read in the New Testament where Christ says to his disciples, let the dead bury their dead. You follow me? Now, let the dead bury the dead. This is kind of an abstract sentence. He's obviously not talking about physically dead people. He's talking about alive people who are going to bury physically dead people, but he's referring towards both of them as dead.
First death we were talking about, the more obvious, that people, we get old, we get sick, we die. Mm-hmm. Same with animals, same with plants. Right, that mystic was saying, what would it be like if we did not die, but we would be aging and getting older and older? Well, the consequence of the fall of getting older, getting weaker, losing the beauty of our vigor of youth is all a consequence of the fall, as we understand. And so that's one dimension of death. Now, the death you're talking about, that Jesus is saying, let the dead bury their own dead, I remember how he would refer to himself. He would say, I am the way and the truth and the life. And so he who follows me will not die, but will have life everlasting. When his followers were noting that there were others who may or may not have been calling themselves followers as well, but we're making kind of exceptions. Will you wait a minute, please, Jesus, while I go do this other thing? What he was referring to is they were living by a whole other framework, another type of God in a sense, of the busyness of life, which can sometimes take on a life of its own, and we get different priorities. And so if we take on different priorities that lead us away from the author of life and love, then we are serving an idol. And so idols, in a sense, are dead. Idols lead to death. And so if we are high, so to speak, on our delusions of reality, and we're running around building and burying our own empires or mutual empires that we might be building together, but they are not empires that are actually trying to become offshoots of the true vine, if I can change my metaphor, then that's the dead burying their own dead. Oftentimes in my class with some of my students, we talk about what's the difference between feeling alive and feeling high. Mm-hmm. And so there's a very little difference sometimes. We can hardly tell the difference. When we are high, though, we are not grounded in reality, capital R, which is our being grounded in the love of the living God, thrice holy. And so being happy, being joyful, celebrating, that's a wonderful thing when we do it in the presence of one another and the loving God. And truth, whatever truth is for us. And so when people are striving to be real, capital R, that's a different kind of joy than when we are high. And it's a little bit about us and our conception of reality and our being greater than often than others. So yes, let the dead bury their own dead. Jesus is referring to people chasing other priorities and perhaps serving other gods than him.
We have idols, and we have God, we have reality, and we have illusion. Sometimes we are taken away by the illusion part of the life, and we forget about the reality, what the truth is, the person. We forget about this person, and we go after the dead idol, which creates illusion. Can you please introduce us a little bit about the illusions of life. It has been interesting for me last year maybe. I have been always coming across with explanations of illusion, and that in this time it's very important to free ourselves from illusion and find the truth. Would you please a little bit give us an explanation? What do you think from spiritual or psychological perspective? What is the illusion?
I need to say that we need to be careful about what the media preaches about what reality is, for example. That includes television, that includes our favorite websites, that includes all the toys that have been given to us for the good and for the not so good, or for pure distraction, which may have good things and not so good things within that as well. But what are we being distracted to? What are we being distracted away from, and what are we being distracted to? What is our understanding of society and life and culture about? And what is undergirding our values, and what is undergirding our framework and how we see things? And I think I'm noticing now that more and more people don't have a framework. You know, there used to be a kind of framework going on, but it would be sort of a situational framework. And I think people in some ways are noticing this and are somehow maybe being led to a framework to help prioritize their lives. And sometimes that might be religion, sometimes it might be something else. It might be success, it might be something else, I don't know. Or if we do have a spiritual or a religious orientation, that we turn it on and off, that it's on a few minutes a day or an hour or two a week on a specific day, and then it's the rest of life. And we don't stop to look at what is the rest of life. What's that being led by? What are we following? And sometimes we're kind of under a spell of assumptions that kind of en masse together, creating our direction and our orientation in life. And sometimes we can be just in a fugue-like state, you know, not quite turned on, not quite turned off, but kind of following through because there's nothing else better. And so what does Jesus say? You know, what does Jesus offer? He offers himself. And what does he teach? He teaches us to love God with all our heart, soul, and minds, and our neighbor as ourselves. And that to trust him, that he is the way and the truth and the life. What does that mean today? We as Christians today, right now, are still in the third week of the Easter season, just starting the third week of the Easter season, where we greet each other with Christ is risen, truly he is risen. Why do we say that? Because we believe that the risen Lord, Jesus really did die, Jesus really did come back to life in a way we don't understand, but he came back in a physical way. And some people might say, well, maybe he came back symbolically or he came back spiritually. But the scriptures talk about, the Bible talks about, the New Testament talks about him sort of coming back to his disciples and his closest friends saying, no, look, here, touch me, touch my hands, touch my side. And at the same time, he would appear out of nowhere. He would like walk through walls. The history of the church talks about these phenomena, that he could be touched. In fact, he would even eat in their presence. He'd say, give me something to eat, and they would give him something to eat so that they could see that he was in a body. He wasn't a ghost. He wasn't a spook. And nevertheless, he could do things that with his new body that could not be done before. The church has taught through the centuries that this gives us a sense of maybe what our resurrected bodies will be like someday when we are resurrected as well. The church has affirmed through the centuries that Christ will return at some point, and that the dead will be risen from the dead, and those who are still alive this side of the grave will also be given their new spiritualized bodies, if we want to call that, with their new physical bodies, their post-resurrectional bodies, as they enter the new life with Christ in paradise. So for us to say Christ is risen is to affirm that death is overcome, that evil is overcome, that God loves us unconditionally, to the point where God himself died. What does that mean? I don't know. There are hymns that say the angels could see you in heaven as God, and at the same time, you're dead on the tree. What is that about? What is that? But there are hymns where the angels scratch their heads. They don't know how this happened. Or hymns referring to earlier parts in Jesus' life. You are reigning in heaven, and here you are also a babe wrapped in swaddling clothes. By rational left brain analysis, this is complete nonsense. Mm-hmm. Complete nonsense. But as one of my favorite scriptures is from St. Paul in 1 Corinthians, but he says, if Christ has not been raised, then our preaching is futile and your faith is empty. Some translations say your faith is in vain. So what does it mean to be a resurrectional people?
When first woman meets Christ, goes to the tomb, it was empty, and then Christ appears to her. And she wants to go close, and he says, don't come close because I haven't gone to my Father yet. Could you please explain this a little bit? Why wouldn't he let her come close? Was there any difference between that time and the time that he was among them and everybody could touch him freely? And between that time and the time when he goes to the apostles and tells Thomas, come and touch my side and my hands. This is kind of like in the middle of him being before the crucifixion and after, when he starts talking to the disciples and says, come check, give me something to eat. But here he says, don't touch me. I have heard some explanations explained by a Coptic priest that there's a different word there, don't catch me. And that's the approach that she has towards him, going close. So he says, don't
clutch me almost.
Yes.
Like don't clutch, don't grab, don't clutch me.
Yes.
Right? I take it literally. I do think that in the mystery of the resurrection, the Lord was in the process of doing something with God the Father that we don't understand, and that while he had been resurrected, he had other work to do. I don't know what that means regarding his physical body or anything. It's just part of the process, I would say. And explanation is quite beautiful. Do not clutch at me. Do not grab me. Do not grasp at me. It's, in other words, I'm not done yet. I'll see you later. But here I am. Here I am. And go tell the apostles. This is important. I'll catch you later. But she was so bereft. And she was at the cross to the very end. She was probably one of the last faces besides his mother's that he saw before he died. And so maybe it's a sweet thing to think that she was one of the first. Maybe he wanted to see her.
The prototypes of resurrection. We see in the New Testament that he gives resurrection to the girl of the centurion, and then Lazarus is risen from the dead, and the young person who was dead and they were going by and he touched and he rose. So there were acts of resurrection before his resurrection, even though he was confirming that he is the resurrection, but he would give a resurrection to others also. What is the difference, and if there is really a prototype of Christ before him rising, has it been in people's minds that there has to be a resurrection, since people have been struggling against death so long?
Yeah, people are going to think we're way out there with some of the things we're going to be saying, but I do think metaphorically, even outside of the Judeo-Christian world that we understand it, good people have been searching for the good. And good people have been searching for the other, capital O, meaning the God, the source of life, the giver of life. And so there are numerous philosophers and Christian writers, Christian theologians, who will at times identify, they can almost see the pattern of the search for Christ, the search for the love of God, the search for dying and rising in God, like an intuitive pre-echo in many other cultures. One of my favorite philosophers who became a Christian in her faith, Simone Weil, who spoke and wrote at least 7 languages to the best of my understanding, would often look through ancient Greek philosophy and ancient Greek mythology, as well as the mythologies of other religions, including Hinduism. And she would say, look here, look here. This is a metaphor for the search for Christ. And it's astounding that the way she put it, oh my gosh, she's right. And so, because we are all knit together by the same Creator, that all of us, as one Protestant minister on the TV loves to say, we have the fingerprints of God all over us. And I love it when he says that. People searching with open hearts and minds, even if they never were exposed to the Judeo-Christian tradition, are often experienced and are awarded with a lot of love and good. It's as if all of creation is groaning for this.
Now, what I see is happening today is when we say Easter season, this is painful for me because I'm in that all the time when it's the Easter season, that people celebrate it without understanding. Now I feel like the opposite of what I told just a second ago is happening. the Christianity covered the paganism. Now the paganism is covering Christianity. Would you please speak about that a little bit? What does Easter mean? Why do people say Easter versus Pascha or resurrection of the Christ?
Well, Easter means a lot. And so when I say Easter for you and me, I'm referring to Pascha, the event of the resurrection of Christ. But oftentimes in various Eastern Christian church families, and now in some Western church families, you will hear Easter referred to by the term Pascha, which is the Greek word for the Passover. Why? Because we as Christians affirm that Christ passed over from death into life. And so all of creation is made new again, taking all of creation to a new place. One of the hymns that is sung for the 40 days of during the celebration of Easter is the Tropari, and the hymn says, "Christ is risen from the dead, trampling down death by death, and upon those in the tombs bestowing life." Death really occurred. Christ really died, so that whatever it meant, that failure of humanity at one point, so that whatever failures have occurred in creation from the very beginning has been assumed by the love of God and taken on Him, and a new bridge has been built. And so that all is new again. There is a recreation, not just a repair, but a recreation has occurred as a result of the resurrection. And so it's sad, you're very right, I think, that now, in a sense, paganism or whatever secularism, idolatry, whatever human-based idols running amok in our society, has always been the case. But I think with all the toys, everything's been ramped up a lot as a result of the gifts and the toys we have in our contemporary life now. For example, the Easter bunnies and the Easter grass that you buy for the Easter bunny baskets. I know that's what you're referring to celebrate Easter. And yes, I can understand why little chicks and Easter bunnies and bunnies were chosen sort of to culturally point to, in an indirect way, the new life. So I see the Christian connection, but we've lost that connection to the deeper meaning of new life. And by focusing on bunnies and chicks and nice clothing, and turn it into a day off and perhaps a day to get together, cut away from this deeper grounding in the truth of the love of God for us. When I'm in Greece, for example, and here I am talking about the Bible in the original Greek and how the church through the centuries has understood various dimensions of Christian life, this dynamic has also infected every country on the planet, including Greece. I'll go to the department stores, and some of the Easter candles or the baptismal candles that in the early church, when one was baptized, they were baptized into the light and life of Christ, and so one is given the candle to symbolize their aligning themselves with Christ. And at weddings, we're all given a candle, again to symbolize the light of Christ in our life that we are affirming and holding in our life and in our being. And when one dies, they also, at funerals, we give candles, and people hold a candle lit, even at a funeral service. Most of the time. Some churches may not do that for various reasons, for practical reasons, but in most Orthodox churches, even now, people at funerals will be holding a lit candle to remind us of our joining Christ and being one with Him in His light and in His death and resurrection. And so that very important symbol of what the candle has taken on for us. When you go to some of these Greek department stores, you'll see candles that are a little bit doctored up and they're made bigger, and they'll have lace on them, and candles made for kids, and you'll see Donald Duck on the lace, and you'll see Goofy, I'm sorry, I'm embarrassed to say this, Goofy on the lace, and other cartoon characters, thinking, gee, it's going to keep the child's attention in church by having Donald Duck and Goofy and Pluto on their baptismal candle. But I am outraged, I am scandalized beyond belief to see these things. And I'm thinking, okay. Or an old bus ad. When I was in Greece about 10, 15 years ago, and Coca-Cola used to have a campaign that said in English, always Coca-Cola or always Coke. During Easter time, I saw on a bus downtown Athens the crosses being lit, which is from the time in the service where we're affirming the resurrection. We're saying Christ is risen, indeed He is risen. And underneath there's a bottle of Coke, and it says Panda Coca-Cola, always Coca-Cola. And it's beyond a scandal. It's an abomination in my world to see Coke presenting itself with the light of Christ's resurrection. But hello, welcome to commercialized life and the lack of, talk about the dead burying their own dead, the immense amount of deadness it took to come up with that kind of campaign. It was quite witty, but pretty dead.
There was a tradition that the Christians were mainly baptized during the Feast of Resurrection. Why do you think this was?
In the ancient church, it was preferred for Christians to be baptized, and they were often done mass baptisms, but after much scrutiny and preparation that took oftentimes years. Remember, to become a Christian in the early centuries of the church was to first become a catechumen. You were enrolled, you were considered a Christian just by saying, okay, I am going to submit myself to this life and discipline and become a member of this church. From that moment on, the Christians sort of claimed you. They had dibs on you. They took it upon themselves to help form you, fashion you, and help you grow in the Lord. And then when it was time that it was discerned that the person was ready for baptism, they would be usually received into the church in a group baptism on Easter itself, or on the Feast of Pentecost, or Theophany, which was when in the church the Lord's baptism was remembered. Or in the ancient church, we have to remember Christmas and Theophany or Epiphany were kind of the same feast, that Christ coming into the world to conduct his ministry, to bring us to him. In the most ancient days, especially before the 4th century, the feast of Christmas and the feast of Theophany or Epiphany were celebrated at the same time. And so that is why you'll find in the East and in the West a very close association between Christmas now, where we celebrate the birth of the Lord, and the Theophany later, within 12 days, where we celebrate in the East his baptism. In the West, what is often remembered at Epiphany is the 3 wise men visit the Lord. All of that bears witness to the Lord's coming to earth to proceed with this mission that he was given, that he took on.
Since we came to the point of baptism, we'll continue from that point next time we meet. And this is the theme, the resurrection, Christ himself. And next time we'll continue talking about the resurrection. And we'll start from the symbol of baptism. Maybe we have to dedicate a couple of shows to the baptism itself, but as a symbol of resurrection, of new life, we will start from that and continue to talk about the main aspect of resurrection. Thank you very much again, and we'll meet again next time.